Okay, this is chapter 12, Stranded. They walked slowly across the field and down the hill to the old Perkins place. There were 4 or 5 cars parked outside. His father raised the knocker. Jess could hear P.T. barking in from the house and rushed to the door. "Hush, P.T., a voice which Jess did not know said, "Down." The door was opened by a man who was half leaning over to hold the dog back. At the sight of Jess, P.T. snatched himself loose and leapt joyfully upon the boy. Jess picked him up and rubbed him just like he did when he was a puppy. "I see he knows you," the man said. "Come in, won't you?" They went into the golden room, and it was just the same, except more beautiful because the sun was pouring through the windows. 4 or 5 people Jess had never seen before were sitting about, whispering, but mostly not talking at all. There was no place to sit down, but the strange man was bringing chairs from the dining room, so they waited. An older woman got up slowly from the couch and came over to Jess's mother. "I'm Leslie's grandmother," she said, putting out her hand. His mother took it awkwardly. "Miss Aarons," she said in a low voice from up the hill. Leslie's grandmother shook his mother's hand, then his father's. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You must be Jess. Leslie told me about you," the grandmother said. For a minute, Jess thought she was going to say something else. He didn't want to look at her, so he gave himself over to rubbing P.T., who was hanging across his lap. "I'm sorry," her voice broke. "I just can't bear it." The man who opened the door put his arm around her, and Jess could hear her crying. He was glad she was gone. There was something weird about a woman like that crying. It was as if the lady who talked about toothpaste on TV had suddenly burst into tears. It didn't fit. He looked around the room full of red-eyed adults. "Look at me," he wanted to say. "I'm not crying." A part of him stepped back and examined his thought. He was the only person his age he knew whose best friends had died. It made him important. The kids at school on Monday would probably whisper around him and treat him with respect, the way they treat Joe Weems the year after his father was killed in a car crash. He wouldn't have to talk to anybody he didn't want to, and all the teachers would be especially nice to him. Mama would even make the girls be nice to him. He had sudden desire to see Leslie laid out. He wondered if she were back in the library or in Millsburg at one of the funeral parlors. Would they bury her in blue jeans or maybe the blue jumper and a flowery blouse? Bill came into the room. P.T. slid off Jess's lap and went to him. The man leaned down and rubbed the dog's back. "Jess." Bill came over to him and put his arm around him as though Leslie had been instead. Bill held him close so that a button on his sweater was pressing painfully into Jess's forehead. He could feel Bill's body shaking, and he was afraid to look up that he would see Bill was crying too. He didn't want to see Bill crying. He wanted to get out of this house. It was smothering him. Why wasn't Leslie here to help him out with this? Why didn't she come running in and make everyone laugh again? "You think it's so great to die, make everyone cry and carry on? Well, it's not. She loved you, you know." He could tell from Bill's voice that he was crying. "She told me that once. If it weren't for you, that..." "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for being such a wonderful friend." Bill didn't sound like himself. He sounded like someone in the old mushy movie, the kind of person Leslie and Jess would laugh at and imitate. "Boo-hoo-hoo, you are such a wonderful friend to her." He couldn't help moving back, just enough to get his forehead off that stupid button. To his relief, Bill let go. He heard his father ask Bill about the service, and Bill answered quietly, almost in his regular voice, that they had decided to have the body cremated and were going to take the ashes to the family home in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Cremated? Something clicked inside Jesse's head. That meant Leslie was gone, turned to ashes. He would never see her again, not even dead. Never! How could they dare? Leslie belonged to him more than anyone in the world. No one had even asked him. No one even told him. And now he was never going to see her again. And all they could do was cry. Not for Leslie. They weren't crying for Leslie. They were crying for themselves, just themselves. If they cared all about Leslie, they would have never brought her to this rotten place. He, Jess, was the only one who really cared for Leslie, but Leslie had failed him. She went and died just when he needed her the most. She went and left him. She went swinging on the rope just to show him she was no coward. So there, Jesse Aarons. She was probably somewhere right now laughing at him, making fun of him like he was Mrs. Myers. She had tricked him. She had made him leave his old self behind and come into her world. And then before he was really at home in it, it was too late to go back, and she had left him stranded there like an astronaut wandering around in the moon, alone. He was never sure later just when he left the old Perkins place, but he remembered running up the hill towards his own house with angry tears streaming down his face. He banged on the door. Maybelle was standing there, her brown eyes wide. "Did you see her?" he asked. "Did you see her laid out?" He hit her in the face, as hard as he'd ever hit anything in his life. She stumbled backward from him with a little yelp. He went into the bedroom and felt under the mattress until he retrieved all his paper and paints that Leslie gave him for Christmas. Ellie was standing in the bedroom door fussing at him. He pushed past her. From the couch, Brenda too was complaining, but the only sound that really entered his head was that of Maybelle whimpering. He ran out of the kitchen door and down the field all the way to the stream without looking. The stream was a little lower than it had been when he had last seen it. Above, from the crabapple tree, the cord of the rope swung gently. "I am now the fastest runner in 5th grade." He screamed something without words and flung the papers and paint into the dirty brown water. The paints floated on top, riding the current like a boat, but the paper swirled around about, soaking in the muddy water, being sucked down, around, and down. He watched them all disappear. Gradually his breath quieted and his heart slowed from its wild pace. The ground was still muddy from the rain, but he sat down anyway. There was nowhere to go, nowhere, ever again. He put his head down on his knee. "What a damn fool thing to do," his father sat down on the dirt beside him. "I don't care, I don't care." He was crying now, crying so hard he could barely breathe. His father pulled Jess up on his lap as though he were Joyce Ann. There, his father said. "Shh, shh. I hate her," Jess said through his sobs. "I hate her. I wish I'd never seen her in my whole life." His father stroked his hair without speaking. Jess grew quiet. They both watched the water. Finally, his dad said, "Hell, isn't it?" It was the kind of thing Jess could hear his father saying to another man. He found it strangely comforting. "Do you believe people go to hell? To hell, really? You ain't worrying about Leslie Burke." It did seem peculiar, but, Maybelle's not God. "Yeah, but how do you know what God does? Lord, boy, don't be a fool. God's gonna send any little girl to hell." He had never in his life thought of Leslie Burke as a little girl, but still, God was sure to. She wouldn't have been 11 until November. They got up and began to walk up the hill. "I didn't mean that thing about hating her," he said. "I don't know what made me say that." His father nodded. He understood. Everyone, even Brenda, was gentle on him. Everyone except Maybelle, who hung back as though afraid to have anything to do with him. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, but he couldn't. He was too tired. He just couldn't say the words. He had to make it up to her. He was too tired to figure out how. That afternoon, Bill came up to the house. They were about to leave for Pennsylvania. He wondered if Jess would take care of the dog until they got back. Sure. He was glad Bill wanted him to help. He was afraid he'd hurt Bill by running away this morning. He wanted to know that Bill didn't blame him for anything, but it wasn't the kind of question he could put into words. He held PT and waved as the dusty little Italian car turned into the main road. He thought he'd wave back, but it was too far away to be sure. His mother never allowed him to have a dog, but she made no objection to PT being in the house. PT jumped up on his bed and slept all night with PT's body curled up against his chest.